And for more on this, we're joined now by Michael T. Snyder, founder of the Economic Collapse blog from Carnation, Washington. So, Michael, I'm sure you just got a chance to see that story, and it seems crazy to some Americans that these traders and leaders in Europe are actually being held accountable for the financial situations of their countries. But what's your opinion? Why are the leaders and traders in Europe being held more accountable than the ones right here in the United States?
Well, a big part of the problem is that there's just so much corruption going on in our financial system here in the United States that where in the world do you begin? You begin with Goldman Sachs and the horrific things that they did to help cause the housing collapse. Do you begin with JP Morgan and their tremendous manipulation of the gold and silver markets? The corruption is just everywhere, but it also extends to the U.S. Congress. There's so much corruption in the U.S. Congress that they are hesitant to investigate anyone else in case their own corruption could be exposed. The corruption runs so deep and is so vast that the few people in government who are actually trying to investigate these things are absolutely overwhelmed right now.
So you obviously just touched on this, but I mean, is there something fundamentally wrong with the American system that, as Christine pointed out in her story, those who are making decisions don't seem to have consequences, and they seem so far removed from the reality of what's actually happening on the ground, who's actually being affected by their decisions?
Well, part of the situation we're facing in the United States is these big, gigantic firms give tons of money to political campaigns. So Barack Obama, if you look at some of his top donors, you've got names like Goldman Sachs, you've got names like JP Morgan, you've got the biggest financial institutions pouring tons of money into these political campaigns. So then the politicians in return are very hesitant to start investigating their biggest donors.
And I think another interesting kind of headline I saw the other day was in the Financial Times, and it said that big American CEOs are actually sitting on tons of cash, and instead of spending it or using it to hire more people, they're purchasing $273 billion of their own shares. Many people would say, hey, these guys got bailed out. They have an obligation to spend their money, but instead, they're just sitting on it to make themselves profit more at the end of the day. What needs to happen here for the people who caused this financial crisis to help turn the American economy around?
Well, the truth is they aren't really interested in turning it around. Now, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, they both promised that if we helped Wall Street, in turn, Wall Street would help Main Street, but that is not happening. Today, we see 43.6 million Americans are now living in poverty, according to the Census Bureau. Over 41 million Americans are on food stamps. Every single month, they're dependent on the federal government for the food that they eat. And in fact, the number of Americans on food stamps has increased a whopping 55% since 2007 alone. Main Street isn't being helped out, and these big global corporations, these big banks are just hoarding cash, and it's not trickling down.
Why aren't more Americans outraged by this? Recently, I actually did a story where I explored the mass protests that are happening all over Europe regarding their financial situation. But it seems like in the U.S., people don't seem to be so concerned with holding these guys accountable. Is it just because they're more worried about day-to-day things like eating and having a home? What are your thoughts?
Well, many Americans have had to take second or third jobs just in order to survive, but also U.S. media keeps telling them that things are going to get better, that things are going to turn around soon. Just hang in there. Things are going to turn around. But as we saw from the employment numbers today, things aren't getting any better. In fact, there are some measures of unemployment, like you find on shadow government statistics, where it shows that the number of Americans unemployed and those who are discouraged from pursuing work total over 20% now. So the truth is that the U.S. economy is in decline. The U.S. economy, we used to be the wealthiest, most powerful economic nation on the earth, but the United States is now a nation in decline. Since 2001, over 42,000 factories have shut their doors. As your report noted earlier, they're going overseas, millions of jobs are going overseas, and they're not coming back. But the American people don't really understand this yet. They still think that, oh, this is just a recession, things are going to turn around, but things are not going to turn around. Things are getting worse for the U.S. economy every single month.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but I want you to elaborate a little bit more on the links between Washington and Wall Street and possible pressure to sort of overlook what these guys did in the past? What would it take to actually see some of these people getting prison sentences like they are in Europe?
Well, what we need are some people in Washington, D.C. that actually have some integrity in the Justice Department and in the other law enforcement agencies. The SEC is basically a joke. They're asleep at the switch, and they're not enforcing the laws. So if the laws don't get enforced, the people are not going to be held accountable. But it's just not Wall Street that's responsible. The entire system is broken. Every single month, the United States government goes into much more debt. Every single month, wealth flows out of the United States at a staggering rate. We run a trade deficit of around $40 or $50 billion every single month. So every single month, the U.S. economic system deteriorates just a little bit more. And it's going to keep getting worse unless something is done in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, times are certainly tough, and I think a lot of people are looking to Washington to figure something out finally. That's Michael T. Snyder, founder of the Economic Collapse blog.